Hi everyone, Keith from Markenberg Farms. It is now mid to late September, and this is when the temperatures finally start to cool off. It gets a little nicer out here, but it's also the time of the year that we start taking our soil tests here on the farm. We always want to do this at the same time every year, so we kind of get the same consistency of the soil biology and microbiome that's going on and know exactly what our soil is doing. So we're going to go out in the field. We're going to take some tests out of this plot here behind me. We're also going to go out into what was a sunflower field, which is basically untouched ground out here. This is old farmland out here that has been farmed for over 150 years conventionally, that I've turned over into organic and naturally sustained farmland that we use for vegetable production over the past 5 years. So this plot out here has sat dormant for, we're at 3 years now. I plowed it this year, planted a cover crop. I have not amended it at all, so we'll get a good comparison of what the test is out there to what it is up here where I've been working in these plots for over 5 years. So we're going to go out in the field, take some samples. So there's just a few things you actually need to take a soil sample. You don't need all that much. You basically need some containers, some bags, and then your tools to take your soil sample with. What I have here is a non-reactive trowel. You always want to have non-reactive metal whenever you're taking a soil sample, because it can throw off measurements of iron and other minerals like that because of what's actually on the tool you're using. This one's actually cast aluminum, which is great. I also have a soil probe. I do not own this soil probe. I actually borrowed this from our extension office here. We're in Shawnee County, went down to the Shawnee County extension office. They actually have a bunch of these that you can rent out. They're free to rent. You give them a $20 deposit, and when you bring it back, you actually get your $20 back for it. Next, we have our container, because we're going to take a composite sample. We're actually going to move around and take samples from different spots, which I'll explain here in a little bit. That is marked with our field numbers on it. Since I'm taking multiple samples, I want to have all of these buckets marked. Again, clean, brand new bucket. Then we have what we're going to actually put our soil sample into. We have a My Soil test kit here. This was provided to me, and we're going to try this out. I also have the bags that are provided by the Shawnee County Extension, which go out to the K-State laboratory. That's our state laboratory here. Any big ag state will have extension offices, usually in each county, and then to a centralized lab where they'll actually run the samples for you. Some states are free, some you have to pay a minimal charge, some do free, and then you pay more for the more extensive ones. That just all depends on the region you're in. Now, I know in our region, I can get a fairly good composite test with a lot of things for right around $20 to $30 per sample. That's relatively cheap for what I get done, but also fairly expensive as well. I mean, that's $20 a sample. You don't want to go take 10 samples because that's $100 worth of soil samples. Now, the My Soil test kit will give you a good composite of just one sample. Other states, different prices. There's also private laboratories as well. I know of Midwest Lab, we've got Logan Lab, there's various others, and there's also soil consultants you can talk to as well that will have you send the samples directly to the lab of their choice. These soil consultants, you want to look for, not the big ag ones, you want to look more towards the small farm type, the vegetable farms, the produce farms, and they'll give you a much better idea of how your soil is working and how to actually work with your soil. I've talked to a couple in the past, and they're very helpful. Minimum charge, I want to say it was under $100 for each consultant that I've talked to, plus the cost of the sample. And the great thing was, they told me that whatever I was doing was great. So that means I obviously have a good soil fertility program out here, and I'm getting everything to where I want it to be. And that's kind of what we're going to go look at. This area around me, I've amended all of this and brought it to the levels where I believe it should be at. I don't know if I've necessarily tested this plot in 2 or 3 years. I think the one just down the way from here I have. But we're also going to go out and take some soil that has not had anything done to it. So that's completely, well, not virgin, but soil before I went to correct it. I do know that we have low pH and very low phosphorus out here. And those are a lot of the things I correct when we first amend a soil and really get it up to production value. So I guess we'll go out and start taking some tests. Now I want to take a second to discuss why testing our soil is so important. First and foremost, if we don't know what we have, we don't know how to work with it. More importantly than that is, amendments are expensive, so you don't want to put too much of something you don't need onto your land. That's just about the most important fact of this. But as well as, if you don't know what you have, you don't know what to work with. The simplest thing you're going to get back from your soil test is your pH. pH is number one thing that drives your crop production, your nutrient intake. Ideally, you want to have a pH for almost all vegetable crops in between a 6 and a 6.8. A lot of people try to shoot for the 7, but those are big ag farmers like the ones across the field from here, which you can't quite see because they just harvested the corn out on the neighboring property. They want to have a neutral pH, which is darn near 7, for the simple fact that the glyphosate and the ammonia nitrate take up best at that neutral 7. But that is not the ideal environment for vegetable plants to grow. Ideally, you want that 6 to 6.8. Now that is because that is where you get your best reactions and have the best uptake of nutrients and minerals for your production. So if you don't know what you have, you don't know where you're going. And then we go to the second part, that nutrients are expensive. If you want to get natural brown rock phosphate, for one bag, it is like $30 for, I think it's a 25-pound bag, and that's not even going to include the shipping to you if you can't find it locally. Lime's cheap. There's no problem with that. Just make sure to get a natural lime. I prefer to use nothing that's been chemically altered. That's not to saying that there's anything wrong with that, but we only use things that are natural because we are an organic farm, so we have to abide by those protocols. So for us, no quick lime, no hydrated lime, just naturally pelletized lime. Ideally, we like to get dolomitic lime, but that's because we are low on magnesium because this field has been commercially cropped for years upon years. And we only know this because of the soil test. There's also other nutrient packs we use, which you can buy available. There's a micronutrient packs you can find. You have to search around for some of these things and make sure that they have the ingredients that you need for your field. We're also very, very low on phosphate, like I was talking, which is why we buy the brown rock phosphate, which is really, really expensive. Like if I wanted to do this whole field out here, I would have to get probably $5,000 worth of rock phosphate delivered from Tennessee in a dump truck and then have a spreader come out and spread it, which for me is not ideal. I can correct some of that through my fertilizer application, but any of these new beds I always create, I always try to put the brown rock phosphate in there to help. We're real low on calcium, amazingly enough, considering we're in a limestone region, but we're up here on a bluff that has been leveled over time. We're also in a heavy clay. That's another thing you get out of your report is your CEC value. That's your cation exchange capacity, which is actually the amount that your soil can hold. Kind of think of it like, almost like a gas tank. The higher CEC you have, the bigger gas tank you have. So if you have a CEC down here at 2, you can put a lot of stuff in here, but it's only going to hold this much. You can keep putting stuff in, but you're never going to get more than this. Your crop in the field might actually drain this out and it needs to be replenished mid-season. If you have a high CEC like we do out here, like I've got numbers out here almost towards 20 and 22, you have a really, really big tank. I can feed everything at the beginning of the season and it'll hold it and slowly drain through the season, and I do not have to put anything else on it. I might have to feed a little bit more nitrogen and other things to the tomatoes and cucumbers, which are real high takers, but that's the main thing. Anything else like this, you really don't have to worry about. So that is the main reasons why it is very, very important to have your soil tested. It's also very, very important to understand your soil tests. The My Soil test apparently has feedback it gives you, which we'll see here later. And other soil tests, like I know through our ag lab, they always give me something back, but it's always commercial stuff. Feed it a bunch of 2020, throw out some lime and some sulfur and some, gypsum and things like that, but I never pay attention to those. There's a lot of good resources out there. It does take study. Also consult soil scientists because they're very helpful. So what we want is to take a composite soil sample randomly throughout the area we're working in. I have half a bed of lettuce still here. This was radishes. This was all amended with the same fertilizer as was this, which I practically do every single time we cycle a crop through here. So I'll probably take 1 or 2 tests over here, and then I'll work my way over to the other side of the bed where I do not have freshly planted crops in and take soil samples there. The reason I don't want to go into places that have not had anything grown in them or is currently growing fresh is I don't want to get a sample of my fertilizer and what it's doing. I want a sample of the soil after the crop has already gone through there. So now, as I mentioned, we have 2 methods of taking soil samples. We have the soil probe, which this is just about the easiest and the greatest. So we'll get our bucket number 7, which is for plot 7 that we're in. So we are aiming for about a 6-inch soil depth. Good, easy way to do that, just about the length of your hand. Everybody's hand is usually from 6 to 8 inches. So if you go right about the depth of your hand, you'll have a decent sample down to where you want. We're not taking deep subsoil samples because most of our produce we grows in the top 6 or 8 inches. So with the soil probe, pretty simple. We just push down, give it a couple spins, because we're trying to take a core here, and bring it up. Right there, we've got about that depth right there. Now again, to get your sample out, you have 2 choices. You can either give it a tap, and if it's not coming out, then we switch to using a pocket knife. The main thing is, again, use something that is non-reactive, not metal like a stainless steel knife as well. So we've taken 1 sample here. We're going to move off and take another sample here in a second. But first I want to show you how to take one with a typical garden spade. Everybody has one of these. Just make sure to get a nice clean one. So again, we're only going to get about that depth. So what we're going to do here is go down and try to make a plug. We go from one way, then we go the other way. Then we're going to go back and we're going to try to lift that plug out. So now we have a nice plug of soil. I'm going to flatten it off, trying not to mix it any. And then we're going to try to square the sample slightly as well. The reason we're squaring the sample is so we have equal parts of soil from the bottom of the sample and the top of the sample. And since we have a curved shovel head, we're not going to get as nice of a curved sample. So that's ideally what we're looking for right there. We've got a nice even sample from top to bottom, and we'd add this to our bucket, except I just took one here. So I'm going to take the probe off and we're going to go take some more samples out further across this plot. So here's what I mean about taking a composite sample. Ideally, you want to take spots randomly throughout this field, all the way from top to bottom, side to side. That way you get the best sample of the whole entire plot area, and you know what's best for the whole entire area. You could theoretically test every single bed and try to adjust it the best as possible. A lot of commercial tomato growers and cucumber growers will do this, but they do this per greenhouse. So that's the same theory as what we're doing out here. So I've got a couple flags out there, and these are all spots that I had to be a little bit more selective on because there has been crop harvested off of this and it has not had fertilizer reapplied to it. So basically we're halfway up the block, well, third of the way up the block. We got one there. we got one where we took one originally, which is down closer to the end over here. Then back off to the corner, we actually have all of these beds freshly planted. So we've got a flag right there, and right there. We currently have crops growing out here as well. There's also one more back up here where we harvested off this bed off to the side as well. So I'm trying the best I can with the field that I'm working in to get a comparative sample of the whole entire plot and not just one concentrated area. It'd be really easy just to take all my samples through here. But I plant these fields in succession, or these field blocks in succession throughout the season. So I march my way across block at a time. Each bed is numbered, so we're 1 through 16 down here, 17 through 32 up top. So there are actually 2 sets of beds up here. So throughout the season, I will actually plant 1 bed of lettuce each week. This was my greens field this week, or this year. So we just marched across. We also planted rashes and other greens up top, and we marched across 1 a week as well. Now we've gotten later in the season, we switched over to where the greens come back up to the top, or the lettuce goes back up to the top, and the greens and radishes come down here to the bottom. That's why these are filled in. And also this time of year, we also plant out all of our winter crops. So we have a bunch of carrots and spinach and radishes and daikons and turnips and all kinds of good winter greens over there. But like I said, we cannot sample into those areas because they're already taken. So I'm going to continue to work my way around. I'll pull a few more samples from each of these spots, which I showed you, and then we'll go back and continue working on getting this sample put together. Now that we have our composite sample ready for the lab, we have to determine what we're actually going to test for. The My Soil kit, straightforward. You send it in, they do the test that they're going to do, and they send back the results. But if you're going through an agricultural lab or another third-party lab, you have to really kind of figure out what you're going to use for the test for your soil. There's a lot of choices out there, and there's a lot of results you can get, and a lot of information, and a lot of things you can do. But there's always the 3 basic ones. You've got N, P, and K. Your fuel, your roots, and your stems. Not necessarily in that order. So, nitrogen, of course, what feeds the plant. Your phosphorus and potassium is what builds the roots and basically the body of the plants. You want to have those in the correct amounts for the crops you're going to grow. All of these tests will give you ranges which are best. Basically what we're looking for an optimum, and these are in parts per million. We've got about 46 for your phosphate and about 200 for your potassium. Nitrogen is not a really good key factor to use because almost every time you grow, you're always wanting to add extra nitrogen. If you don't add extra nitrogen, you always have the risk of running short on nitrogen, and there's never any disadvantage of having too much nitrogen in the soil unless you're adding like raw manures, which is never good to begin with. Then the next thing you're going to want to pay attention is to the pH of your soil. The pH is just about the most important factor of the soil test because you have to have the pH in between 6 and 6.8 to get the proper uptake of nutrients to begin with. Another test you're going to want to have run, especially on organic agriculture like this, is your organic matter in the soil. This is a major contribution to what the CEC of your soil is. The organic matter makes a big component of this. If you have very sandy soils, you're going to want to have a high organic matter to get your CEC to kick up on the scale. If you have a heavier clay like me, the organic matter will kick you higher and higher, but it's not going to keep you like clear down here at the bottom as it would with really sandy soils. I'm not familiar with working with sandy soils because I have a heavy clay up here. Then we get down to some of the other base nutrients. Calcium, which would be what come with your limestone. Very important for tomatoes, blossom end rot, of course. Sodium, which you got to watch, especially with synthetic fertilizers. Your sodium level will rise on you very quickly, especially inside of greenhouses. So you have to be very careful with that number. boron, which is a micronutrient. Same thing with your magnesium as well. And that looks like really all that we're watching for, at least on these reports I'm getting through the extension office. And these are the ones I've been running for the past couple years. I know there's some other micronutrients I really like to watch, and I'll have to go back and look and try to find out what those are. But at least your calcium, your boron, your potassium, magnesium, phosphorus is another one you want to watch. You want to keep those in an optimal range as well, which all the reports should give you an optimal range. I do know that some of the labs like to give you results in proprietary mixes that they want to sell back to you. So then that's where you have to be careful of where you get your soil tested from. Always ask for a sample report before you send in a sample, just to kind of see what they're going to give you back. Like, I mean, at the bottom of this, they're telling me to use iron and nitrate of soda and urea and a 33-3 or something similar. And that's just not going to help at all, because we're an organic farm and I can't use any of that stuff. So that's some of the things that I test for and I try to watch on a regular basis. Like I said, there are micronutrient packs you can buy, and they're all kind of pretty much level to bring up your potassium and your boron and your magnesium and things like that. But they have to be applied in very, very small amounts. I mean, we're talking in like 25 pounds per acre amounts, which would almost be a cup over 100 square foot. So that's where it really comes in to get really complicated once you have to start amending your soil. Now you can take a composite sample from anywhere that has been treated equally at all times that you use it. So this field block here has never had anything done to it other than the sunflower field that it is right now. Now we plant our sunflower field with a mixture of cover crops as well. So you can still see the cowpeas in here as well, and a little bit of grass coming through. That gets through every once in a while. But since this has been treated as one composite field, this is 1 acre block here, we can randomly go through and test it. Now the good thing about having a sunflower field is that we actually mow a trail that like winds through here. So as I go through the trail, I'm going to take a sample every now and then and spots down on the ground where it's bare and there's nothing there. That gives me the advantage of getting a sample through this whole entire field, and we should see most likely results very, very similar to what I usually get from testing the soil that hasn't been messed around out here. I might see a little bit higher nitrogen just because of the cowpeas. They were inoculated. We inoculate them with pea inoculant. That way they are producing nitrogen when they're growing. So I'm going to walk around here and get some soil samples from my bucket, and then we'll move back up and we'll mix our sample and get them ready to go off to the lab. So we've got our soil sample here from the untouched land up here. I'll take it up and show you here the comparison between this and what I've worked with, because you can actually see a good difference. But I will tell you, it's best to take your soil samples when it's dry, but not too dry, because when it gets too dry, it's actually hard to get the soil probe down in the ground because it's so darn hard. So you got to kind of look at the best in between both, and that's why typically fall is the best time to take your soil samples. Okay, so I now have my 2 samples. The one closest to me is the one we just took out in the untouched land. The one further away is actually the one that we had from the plot behind me. As you can see, there is quite a bit of difference in the soil texture. This one's more aggregated. This one's more loose and plowed to death. There's also a difference in color. This one's much darker, has a much higher organic matter than this one here. That's because this one has been grown in quite a bit and taken care of, and this one has just been beat to death with conventional agriculture. So now we're going to take these 2 samples and we'll show you how to get them ready for sending off to the soil lab. Okay, so we're going to start with the field that we just got out of here, our soil sample. As you can see, pretty good and well broken up, but it's not quite completely broken up. This is where it's nice to have it a little bit moist, but not superly moist. All we're doing here is we are just slightly breaking up the sample a little bit further That way it's a little easier to test. We're also looking for any organic matter in here, like big giant clumps of stuff, like, well, that's just a little white thread weed seed. But we don't really have any major chunks of anything, because the chunks of organic matter can really throw off your soil sample, because you want to know what's actually in the soil, not what was sitting on top of it or like a big chunk of something that might have gotten into it. The field block soil here is pretty much already broken down because it's just so darn fine to start with. I mean, we really don't have to break it down really far. We just want to get a good mix. So with our soil sample kits, they actually come with a fill to here line. So these are through the Ag Extension office. Other ones just want you to send in a bag and they want roughly a cup or some kind of measurement. But with our fill to here, we will just simply take our sample and pour it in until we fill to right about there. And that's what we're looking for. We'll put all of our proper information on here and go from there. With our My Soil Test Kit, this is actually pretty cool. You have all your stuff inside. We have directions, of course. We have our envelope to send it in, because we'll actually be mailing this, where our other sample will be dropping off at the extension office, so we don't have to worry about the mailing part. It then comes with, inside of your packet, is a test scoop and a solution to put your soil in. This is DI water, and it's got some kind of cash on exchange thing in it. I couldn't exactly understand from the videos I watched, but supposedly it holds a bunch of stuff and does some really cool things, and that's why they put it in DI water to start with, to ship your sample. This is the only samples I've ever found where they actually have a solution that you put your sample into. So now we will take the rest of that, and that was from our plot tin. That way I can look back at this video and properly label everything afterwards. We'll crack the cup. There we go. Not remove any of the water from it, and then we just want 1 scoop of soil. We're going to take the 1 scoop and we're just going to pour it in, just like that. Put the lid back on the top, make sure it's tight, and we'll put it in our envelope and we'll send it back to the laboratory. There are some other instructions in here which we'll get to in the next video, to where you scan in and there is an app and other things to do with this to get the results other than just email. So now I'll just finish testing and taking my samples, and then we'll get ready to send these guys in and send them off to the lab. Well, it's getting dark and I'm getting hungry, so watch out in the next week or two. I should be getting my soil results back, and I'll go through and discuss them and kind of show you the process of how I decide what I'm going to amend them with. But as always, hope you all liked what you saw today. Thought it was useful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank y'all. Have a good day.